So there I was, causing mass mayhem just like any other day in the life of a sadistic 25-year-old man. That was until I got a strange feeling inside of my chest. After getting absolutely demolished by the cops, I realized that the strange feeling I had in my chest was actually the feeling of guilt. All those years of running over innocent civilians, shooting cops for quite literally no reason at all, and even fighting random muscular women were catching up to me. The guilt was just too much to bear, so I made the very difficult decision of finally trying to obey the law. Will I be able to obey the law in GTA 5? Let's find out. As you all know, I've basically been a delinquent my entire life, which means that I don't really know what law-abiding citizens do in their free time. That was until I came up with the idea to do a couple laps in my pool. I decided to swim in my clothes because nothing says devious rule follower quite like not following the norm. After that, I went up to my dog and noticed that he defecated on my recently cleaned patio. As much as I wanted to introduce him to my gun, animal cruelty is against the law. Maybe next time. Anyways, after that I decided to go for a drive since I was getting a little bored of my $3.5 million house. Before I could do that though, I had to catch up on the rules of the road. After a very long and in-depth look into the rules of the road, I was finally ready to begin my drive. A couple of red lights and stop signs later, some guy drove into the rear of my car, which was totally uncalled for. Thankfully, I have really good car insurance, but that still doesn't excuse him purposely driving into the rear of my car, so I beat him up. That may seem a little harsh, but trust me, it's for the greater good. Since I now had this massive scratch on my car, I headed on over to the local car mechanic to see if they could fix it. Not only were they able to fix it, they also didn't charge me an unreasonably large amount of money to do so. $52,000 and a couple of very personal conversations with the car mechanic later, my car was finally complete. To celebrate using all of my hard-earned money on an almost 10-year-old Dodge Charger, I decided to play some golf. Speaking of using hard-earned money, a couple years ago I spent almost $500 on video games for a laptop that could barely run Roblox. I have no idea why I did that, but it is what it is. Anyways, once I arrived at the location, I decided to say hi to the other golfers. They must have not liked me very much because two of them ran away while the other two tried beating me to a pulp. I tried to back away from them, but all they did was follow me like a creepy coach at an all-girls track and field practice session, which means that I had to fight back. After I was done turning their Adam's apples into Adam's apple sauce, I resumed my golfing adventure. For the measly price of $100, you get an outfit that makes you look like Steve from Blue's Clues, a golf club that you can use for bashing heads, I mean bashing balls, I mean playing golf, and even a golf cart that has a max speed of 10 miles an hour. What more could you ask for? A couple hours of golfing later, I left the location. The next thing I wanted to do was see a movie, so I headed on over to the movie theater. Once I arrived, I looked at the movies they were currently showing. Those being Water Torture, Capolavoro, which I may or may not be pronouncing correctly, and Sequel 2. All of those movies looked absolutely horrendous and downright agonizing, but I eventually decided to go with Capolavoro. The reason why I chose this one is because on the poster it clearly states that it's an unforgettable classic that still nobody understands. I wanted to prove them wrong by understanding every single minuscule detail of the movie while simultaneously forgetting every single minuscule detail of the movie. After watching the movie, I can 110% confirm that my previous statement aged like fine wine. I'm not trying to brag or anything, but my parents did always say I was special. I think I'm finally starting to see why. It was getting pretty late, so I decided to end the day off with a trip to the fair. The parking lot was basically empty, so I made sure to park awfully close to this random car. Just because I'm a law-abiding citizen doesn't mean I'm gonna stop being a nuisance to everyone around me. The fair had a lot of fun and totally safe attractions. For instance, there was a roller coaster that was shorter than my will to live, a Ferris wheel that was almost as boring as a 30-minute conversation I had with my uncle on why he thinks Bigfoot's real, and even some people that were talking about the pros and cons of being featured on To Catch a Predator. I'm not too sure if that last bit was a part of the fun and totally safe fair experience, but it was pretty entertaining nonetheless. Once I got back to my car, I checked the time and realized that it was about 1 in the morning. I would normally stay out and do my questionable side hustles, but I was feeling kinda tired, so I made my way back to my house. When I got there, I immediately went to bed in hopes of catching some Z's. Before I move on to the next part, if you haven't already, make sure to like and subscribe. It would really help out the channel, let alone make me a very happy content creator. Anyways, with all of that out of the way, let's get back to the video. When I woke up, I felt like a new man. Just kidding, I basically felt the same as I did yesterday, with the only difference being that I had a little more motivation and a new pair of clothes. With my newfound motivation, I decided to get a job because I'm gonna have to pay my monthly subscription to FeetFinder somehow. I've always wanted to be a taxi driver, so I called one over to my location. Now, I know what you're all thinking right now. CJ, are you really planning on stealing a taxi? You do realize that's against the law, right? Well, instead of viewing it as stealing, view it as borrowing with no intention of returning it to the owner. Once the taxi driver arrived, I politely asked him if I could borrow his taxi. He proceeded to call me a brokey with a hint of attempted vehicular manslaughter, which means that I'm legally obligated to shooting his brains out. Just as I was about to legally shoot his brains out, he yet again called me a brokey with a hint of attempted vehicular manslaughter. I wasn't gonna give up my dreams of being a taxi driver just yet, so I started looking for another one. Once I found one, I legally shot his brains out and then borrowed his taxi. The only reason I was being chased by the cops was because they noticed how mind-numbingly gorgeous I was. I quickly made it clear that I was a minor, which made most of them leave. Emphasis on most of them. Once I got away from the remaining police officers, I started looking for my first customer. My first customer turned out to have a terrible taste in fashion. This dude's really wearing a yellow jacket with gray camo pants. What a world we live in. Once I dropped off Mr. Obsolete, I headed on over to my next customer. Once I picked her up, she told me that she was late for her monthly pedicure and needed to get there ASAP. As a guy who never has and probably never will do a pedicure, I full-heartedly understand what she's going through, so I did what she asked. Is it really breaking the law if someone asks you to do it? It is? Well, let's just pretend it's not for the sake of the narrative. One very brutal car crash later, I was finally able to drop her off at the salon. All in a day's work. Just as I was about to head home, I got a sudden craving for Fig Newtons, so I made my way over to the gas station to see if they had any. When I entered the gas station, I noticed that they had a ton of snacks, which made me a whole lot more optimistic when it came to finding some Fig Newtons. Sadly though, all they had was off-brand soda, a couple of totally non-expired dairy products, and a ton of, hold on a second. Is that what I think it is? Farm fresh eggs that weren't being refrigerated? That has to be against the law. Since this guy likes giving out free salmonella, I decided to give him a free brain piercing. That may seem a little harsh, but trust me, it's for the greater good. The cops must have not agreed with my point of view since they immediately started hunting me down. A couple minutes of driving for my dear life later, one of the cops rammed into my car, which resulted in me driving off the road. There was quite literally nowhere else for me to drive, so I got out of my car and started running like there was no tomorrow. Once I escaped, I needed to get a car, so I headed on over to the car impound to see if there were any cars in need of a permanent home. As it turns out, there were 2 cars without a permanent home. The first one being the Emperor, and the second one being the Stallion. As you all know, I'm a very kind, loving, and downright generous person who would never discriminate against anything or anyone. Anyways, I decided to go with the Emperor since it sounded cooler. I made sure to thank the people that ran this place because if it wasn't for them, I would have never found my new car. Just as I was about to say thank you, they all started shooting at me, which eventually resulted in my demise. That definitely wasn't racially motivated. A little while later, I came across an illegal street race. I've always wanted to have a main character moment, so I joined the race in hopes of killing every single one of the contestants. That may seem illegal and totally unnecessary, but trust me, it's for the greater good. Not only was I unable to kill even one contestant, I also got 4th place, and as a very competitive person, that made me unbelievably furious. To relieve my pent-up rage, I took out my assault rifle and started mowing down all the illegal street racers. Once they were all dead, I got back into my car and started driving back to my house. When I got there, I smoked some weed, stepped in my dog's poop, did a couple laps in my pool, and then looked into the distance, just like any other law-abiding citizen would normally do. But anyways, if you guys enjoyed the video, consider leaving a like, and if you haven't already and you like my content, make sure to subscribe. Anyways, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.